let's start by looking at a few examples of what has been done. Here's one that is just using the geometric shapes. Does it have a sense of depth, would you say? What is it, first of all? What is this representing?
The sun and trees.
Right, sun, we see a sun, we see trees, what else? Anything else? Anyone say? Sky, land. This is all done with what shapes? What shapes do you see here?
Circles.
Circles, right? Ovals on the trees. And what else? Line or rectangles. Do we see a sense of depth here? Foreground, midground, and background? Yep. So this is a way to create a landscape simply. Sometimes it's the simple ideas that are the most genius. So when you feel overwhelmed with the tools, sometimes you can just take a step back and think, just simplify things and be like, okay, I'm just going to use the shapes right now. So, but you could go either way. So you could go with just simple shapes, or you could do something that looks a little bit more like natural world shapes and use the tools to craft your shapes. Once I demonstrate that, so far we're just dragging out simple geometric shapes, but we're going to also learn tools to sculpt the shapes, to reform the shapes to a vision of your own. So there's another take on landscape. There's a pathway that goes out into the hills and the clouds out there. This was a very talented artist who did that one. It's like she did. Oh, this one was another very talented artist. Using some effects going on there. Let's see, what else do I have here? Ooh, this one is another one. This is another one that's simply genius. And you see in Illustrator shapes hanging off the edges, right? And that's totally fine. This artist did the extra credit and made a PNG version. So we're looking at what it looks like in Illustrator here. And when I zoom in Illustrator, you never lose resolution. All the lines stay crisp and clean, right? For extra credit, you would export. You would go to File, hover over Export, and choose one of the export options and choose a PNG to make a raster version of the Illustrator file. And you would, when you make a PNG, you can crop off the edges. You can crop off anything that's hanging outside of the artboard. There are options for that. So this is looking at the PNG. So here's the PNG. At 100%, the PNG looks crisp and clean. It's a high quality raster file. When you start zooming into the PNG, that's when you start seeing the pixels. But PNGs are good to put on a website, post on social media, to share your work with the world. It's a high quality file type, but if you scale it larger than its original size, then you see pixels. You see pixelation because it's an image made of pixels that you export from the original vectors. You want to keep your files that you create in Illustrator. Those are your precious treasures. Those are your originals. That has all the original vector data. Keep that for your portfolio, and then make a PNG for your web portfolio. So you have kind of two types of portfolios. One that's your portfolio that you keep, that's your originals. Like if you're a photographer, you keep your negatives, right? Your originals. And then you export out the set of images that you're going to share with the world, and those are the raster files, the PNGs that you're going to post up on social media or put on your website. So that's extra credit to export a PNG or a JPEG. Here's a JPEG version. Here, let me open up this one is breathtaking. A breathtaking example here. So this is seeing it in Illustrator, and stuff is hanging off the edges, and there's no problem with hanging stuff off the edges when you're in Illustrator. It's your workspace. When you export your file to share with the world, that's when you might crop off the edges. But when you're in Illustrator, this is like you're in your studio and you have paint splattered all over the place, and people don't have to know that. But when you make your PDF or PNG, you're gonna crop off the edges. Here we see kind of the backstory. We see the behind the scenes a little bit. We see, look at this. What do you guys think this is? I haven't demonstrated using this yet, but this is a lens flare that's created by the flare tool, which is not really a shape. What it does when you use the flare tool and you click and drag to draw out a flare, it's just going to the flare is just going to create these interesting effects, blending with the colors in the shapes. But you might think it looks really cool in sci-fi here, but it's really not intended to be looked at on its own. It's intended to be blended in different ways with shapes with other colors. So, but this is really nice. The shapes that were created to do the trees, and then the duplication of these trees, and oh my gosh, the layering of the trees, and the trees being so small, far away along the edges of the mountains, just brilliant. And the choices of colors to create that depth, to create the darker silhouettes in the foreground, and then the midground, you get like a lighter gray, and then these beautiful shades of purple or violet that start to blend into the colors in the sky. It's just breathtaking. And this is the JPEG that was you could do JPEG too as the extra credit if you want to get extra credit. So the file, this is just the image that came out of that would be the image that you share with the world, that you put on the website or post on social media, would look like this, where the edges of the artboard are cropped. Everything hanging off the edges is no longer there. Let's see if there's anything else here. This is probably for when we get into 3D, so I'll hold back on this one. But this one is different. I don't know if this is a landscape, but it's another way to go. It's pretty funny. This was before the pandemic, but this is kind of timely right now. Okay, so I'm gonna close that up, and let's get back into Illustrator.
How can I show my tools in that?
Oh, your tools are hiding now? Try, let's see. Here, watch me. Let's see if this works for you, Sebastian. Can you see me? Go to Window, hover over Toolbars, and make sure that you check on, let's check Advanced. Let's see if they come up then. There they are.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So that's a good place to start. Let's talk about Workspace. My Workspace is a mess right now. So, so if you want to tidy up your workspace at any point, you can go to click on Window, and you'll find Workspace. And then there are all different workspaces layouts that you can choose from depending on the type of workflow that you're going to be focusing on. Like if you're going to get into painting, which we're going to learn later, you could see what the painting workspace is. I'm going to just say, remind me. So with the painting workspace, we have a toolbar on the side as usual. They give you the control panel up above, which is context sensitive, rather than the properties. They don't give you the properties on the right, which you get in the Essentials workspace. And you've got a bunch of different panels that are expanded in the layout, brushes and color and swatches. And then you've got these panels here that are just in icon view, like gradient you can pop out. And then I might go to, let's see, here is the transform panel. You can pop the panels out. You can also stretch this little icon view to show the names, but then you have less space for your art. So you can keep them just down to the icon. So notice when I click on each one of these, I go to transform and then I click on gradient and transform disappears. If you want panels to stay up, you can drag on the panel and let it float so it doesn't go away. Drag on the panel name, the tab, and then if I click this and I want to drag this out and then pop this one back in by clicking the arrows and move them around, you can snap them together. Or you can tab them one on top of the other. You see the blue outline appears, and then they're tabbed together. You can close panels that you don't want that are taking up space. Normally, I'm going to be demonstrating in Essentials. So when I go to Essentials, this is my Essentials as it was, all messed up. But if I want to clean it up and make it back to the factory default, I can go to Workspace and I can go to Reset Essentials. And this is the factory default for Essentials, where we have the Properties panel. We don't have a Control panel anymore. If you go to Workspace Essentials Classic, that's the old way that the old layout for Illustrator, where we have the control panel, which is context sensitive. Like the properties panel, they're both context sensitive. Does anyone know what I mean by that? That means when depending on what I'm doing at any given time, like if I click on the type tool, for example, then my context sensitive menus are going to change and give me control specific for the typing. So I've got the paragraph panel suddenly appear, or paragraph options and character options up in the control panel, and down here we have the character panel appearing in properties. And if I go back to the selection tool, those other additional panels disappear, because it's all context sensitive. But I'm going to go back to Window, Workspace, Essentials, because that's supposed to be the latest that Adobe's moving us in the direction of. And with Essentials, everything is a lot more minimal because we have more, they're giving you more space for your art. So you have more visibility when you're looking at your art, when you're designing, and you see less panels taking up your space. And the tools, the toolbar here, this is the basic toolbar. I prefer all the tools. So that's why I go to Window, hover over Toolbars, and I change it to Advanced. And I like having my toolbar be in 2 columns. So these little arrows make the toolbar in 2 columns, because these little icons at the bottom are very important, and they are very small when you have one column toolbar. So I like to click that, and now I have a two column toolbar, and I see my fill control and my stroke control, and it's easier to see. And if let's say I wanted to customize my workspace, so I'll have it listed there and I could use it again and again. Here at school, unfortunately, everything resets, so you won't be able to store a custom workspace for very long. You can store it for during the class time, but after you restart your computer, it will be wiped out. But if you're working at home, you might make a layout of your own that you like to work with a lot, that's tailored to your specific workflow and your needs. And the way you do that is you make some rearrangements here, like under the window drop down, you'll find all the panels that exist in Illustrator listed here in alphabetical order. So if you're new to Illustrator, I know being acclimated with all these tools and panels can be overwhelming, but just take it one step at a time, because little by little it's gonna start just becoming like second nature. You're gonna start to know these panels, know what they are, know what they're used for, and it's just going to be by heart. But right now, I know it can be overwhelming. I remember I was there once. But if you remember the name of a panel, you can always find it under window in alphabetical order. So panels that I like to work with a lot are the gradient panel. So I might bring that up. And what else? I like to work with swatches, colors. I like to have those two floating sometimes. So let's say I wanted just a layout like this. Or maybe I wanted to dock them on the side, gradient and swatches like that. And then I wanted to make them be in icon view. Wait a minute, that's not working. Or minimize their view. Or here, if I click this one, this collapses to icons. Okay, so now I have these little panels here as icon view that I can pop out one at a time like this. Maybe I want my gradient though to be floating like that. And maybe I want my swatches to be floating. And then these other panels can be icon. And I don't want to have symbols out. Symbols, let's not use symbols for this week. Because symbols are artwork that have been created for you by other artists who work on the development of Adobe. These are like clip art. They use the tools that we're going to be learning to create this art. So let's avoid using symbols right now until we can create our own art, and then we can learn how to use symbols effectively later. So I'm going to close symbols and have swatches. Brushes can just be an icon there. And so, okay, so let's say this is my new layout. I want to save it. I go to Window and hover over Workspace, and I choose New Workspace, right? Because right now I'm on Essentials. I'm going to choose New Workspace and just name this workspace My Gradient Swatches WS for Workspace. And I'll say OK. So what happens then is now when I go to Window, hover over Workspace, I have my own layout set there. And if I go to Essentials, no change happens. It's how I changed Essentials. What I need to do is reset Essentials. And now this is back to the old Essentials. And if I want, or not the old Essentials, this is back to the factory default Essentials with the basic toolbar, one column with no floating panels. But I can always now go back to my workspace and have it set up the way I want to work with it. So It's a way to have your own setup stored. And let me see if I. Okay, so that's enough for that, I guess. So let's get into it. Let's get into learning some more. I'm going to close this example. And this is all very basic right now. We were just getting our feet wet yesterday. So let's start getting more serious about landscape. So let's see, what can I do? Maybe I don't want this. Maybe I want to turn this polygon into a triangle. Notice that there's this little diamond here on the bounding box that I can hover over, and I can drag on it one way or another and change the number of sides. Let me delete that triangle and show you how I did that from the beginning. So we're going to the shape tools. I'm on the advanced toolbar, and I've selected the flare tool. Now that's at the bottom of the list, but I'm going to go back up to rectangle. So we're looking for the rectangle tool. It's at the top of the little section of drawing tools here. Well, actually the pen tool is the drawing tool too. So we've got selection tools on top, and then we've got drawing tools, and we're going to be looking at the rectangle tool. We click and hold down on the rectangle tool, and you have all different types of tools to choose from. So let's say I wanted to make a polygon. I can click polygon, and then I can draw it out like this. If I hold shift, it'll draw it out straight up and down. If I instead of holding down shift, if I press the arrow keys up, I'm adding more sides as I'm drawing out the polygon. If I press the arrow key down, I'm taking sides away. So now I've got a triangle, and then I can hold shift, and I have not lifted my finger up off the mouse, the left click button. If I hold shift, it straightens it, and then release the mouse, then release the shift key, and maybe I'll use that for a sailboat or something. But I'm going to put it out here for now because I don't know what I'm going to do with it right now. So the polygon is the only one you can change the sides after the fact. You can go to the little diamond and drag down on it or up on it. Dragging down is adding more sides. Dragging up is taking sides away. So try that out. See, get that going. Maybe I'll move this star off and move this ellipse off. And I'm going to go with my square here and scale it to be rectangular. So I'm using my selection tool now, the black arrow. And when I hover over the handles of the bounding box, I can scale. I can drag out this way to scale to make it wider. I can hover over the handle like this. So you hover right over the handle so you get a double-sided arrow. And I can drag up or I can drag down to make it taller. If I wanted to scale it proportionally so the width and the height change together, what key do you think I should hold down on? Shift. Very good. So I hold shift and I can, whoops, I got to select it. Hover over. I like to, when I scale proportionally, I like to use a corner to drag out diagonally. So I go, but you could scale proportionally from any of the handles. You hover over a handle on the bounding box and you hold shift and drag and see how it's scaling it proportionally. But I don't want to scale this proportionally. I want to just fill the space with this rectangle to be my sky. And can you tell, does this rectangle have a black outline, a stroke on it?
Yes.
Yes, it does. You can see that right here, that when I select it, you see that it has the blue fill and it has the black stroke. I can bring the stroke to the front and double click on it to change the color. Now it has a green stroke. I can go over to when I have an object selected in properties, because properties is context sensitive, the appearance panel will pop up in properties. So from the appearance panel, I could also control the stroke, make it thicker. I could also click on the swatch for fill or the swatch for stroke to bring up swatch colors to change colors that way. So I'm changing colors of the stroke. But if I don't want the stroke, I can click none here to turn it off or turn it on by adding a color. Now that I turned it off, now it changed the stroke weight. That's funny. Let's say I increase the stroke weight, or you can increase the stroke weight from the drop down button here. I have a really fat stroke. This could look like a window or not. Another way to turn off the stroke is to click on it at the bottom of the toolbar. Click on the stroke icon, and there's a none button right there you can click on. These are different modes. You can turn the stroke into a gradient actually by clicking the gradient mode. Now it's a gradient stroke. Or you can click it to none to turn it off. Click it back on. Let me make it thicker. Click none to turn it off. And then I'm going to click back on my fill because maybe I want to change my fill for this. And I want to just use my selection tool to stretch this shape out to the edges to give myself a background color. So if this was my sky, maybe I want different colors in my sky. So to put different colors in a shape, you might use the gradient panel or switch into gradient mode. So again, there are these three different mode buttons: solid color, gradient, or none, because I can even turn this off. Now this is just a frame, an empty frame with no fill and no stroke, but I want the color back, so I turn the color on. If I want gradient, I can click gradient mode here, but it's just going to default to a grayscale gradient. So I don't want grayscale. I want the color that I chose, so I'm going to turn the color back on. And instead I'm going to grab the gradient panel, and I'm going to drag the color that I have here on the fill onto the gradient slider. But for this to work, I have to have my shape selected. So it's selected, the selection tool. I use the selection tool, select the shape. Then I grab the fill and drag it to the gradient slider, and that's how I can add a color to the gradient. If I want to add more colors, I might use colors from swatches. If you just, while you have your shape selected, if you just click on a swatch, it's going to revert it to solid color. But if you drag a color from swatches into the gradient, onto the gradient slider, then it's going to add the color as a gradient. And things are getting a little muddy in this area, so I'm just going to select this black because this is a grayscale black. It's not a very good black for blending into color. So I'm going to just select this stop, and by clicking on it, and click the trash to delete the stop. And instead, if I want to add a color stop, I can hover under the gradient slider and click to add a color stop. And then maybe if I wanted a black that blends better than that grayscale black, I could double click on the color stop, and then I could adjust. It will bring up these color adjustments, CMYK color. That's what mode we're in, and I can drag this slider this way, and this K, this stands for black. It's a key. Black is considered a key color. You can drag this over and make a black that's going to blend a lot nicer if I wanted a night sky. But do I want a night sky? Another way to delete a stop is to click and drag it off like that. Maybe I want to turn this gradient around. So to flip it around, to change the direction of the gradient, that's when you go to the gradient tool. So you start with the gradient panel to put in the colors you want. And you can use these little diamonds to adjust the gradations to adjust how the colors are blending. You can even duplicate a color. So if I wanted to duplicate this color here, I could hold down the Option key and drag it and move it to where I want it to go. So I just duplicated this color here. Maybe I want this color to be a little darker, so I can double click on it and just adjust my sliders to make it a little darker. Okay, but now let's say I want to flip the gradient, change the direction of the gradient. I would go to my gradient tool for that. So as soon as I select my gradient tool from the toolbar, then you see this gradient tool gadget that you can click on. You can, if you hover over the little box on the end, you can rotate it. You can hover over this box and move it. But I find this to be a little awkward to work with in general. But you can move the color stops and the diamonds just like you can in the gradient panel. But what I really like to do when I switch to the gradient tool is I just like to redraw the gradient. So I hover outside of the gradient tool gadget and I click and drag in one direction or another to redraw it. And sometimes some really cool stuff comes about when you just redraw the gradient. You just click and drag. If you want the gradient to be straight, you can hold Shift and click and drag. If you want some transparency in your gradient, I just switched to my selection tool now. If you want transparency in your gradient, you can click on a color stop that you want to be transparent and change the opacity. And then you can have some interesting stuff happen with opacity changes. So maybe this white, maybe I want this to be transparent. Maybe I want this to be 0 and this to be a little transparent. Well, that's really light. Maybe this one can be back to 100 and this one can be a little darker. And then I can go back to my gradient tool and make adjustments, move it around. So that's linear gradient. Okay. Next, I need some kind of landmass. So let me find. Here's my rounded rectangle. How did I make that? I went to my shape tools. Remember, from your shape tools, you can click and hold and go to the tear off so that you have a floating shape panel. And I just took the rounded rectangle, selected it, and dragged it out. With the rounded rectangle, there are these little corner radii knobs here that you can drag on to change the roundness of the corners. You can go all the way out and make it a regular rectangle if you want, or bring them in. And I'm just doing this right now with my rounded rectangle tool, but if you switch to the selection tool, you can still use the selection tool to change the corners. So let me do that on this one too. So I'll just drag on the corners. Now, maybe I want something more in the foreground and something in the background. Or let me just delete this one and just work with this one. So I selected that and delete, press delete. Okay, now I'm going to scale this out and I'm going to give this a green color. And if I want, well, let me make it a light green for now. Okay, so then I'm going to zoom in with my zoom tool, use my selection tool here, and you can select one corner radius knob at a time. Like if I wanted this corner to be sharp and the rest to be round, I can use my selection tool and just click on the corner and release. As opposed to let me deselect by clicking outside. If I select and then I drag and I click and drag, that's changing all the corners all at once. But if I want to change just just one, I click and release my mouse, and then see how just that one is highlighted there? And the rest are just lighter. The rest of them are not selected, only this one selected. So then I can click and drag just on this one and have that be straight. And maybe I want these two here to be straight, sharp corners, so I can click and release here. And now I'm going to hold shift and click and release. So now these two are selected together, and these two up here are not selected. And then I can click and drag and just control those two together. Now it looks like a Super Mario Brother hill. You guys remember Mario Brothers? Anyone? Okay, so I guess I'm too old, or for some and too young for others. Okay, so here's this, and then let's see. Okay, what else are we gonna do now? Let's see this ellipse here. I didn't show you radial gradient yet. And maybe I need a perfect circle. How do I make a perfect circle? I take the ellipse tool and I hold down what? Shift. Very good. You guys are getting the pattern. So, but I want this to be a sun or a moon, but not green. So I'm gonna give this a color from my swatches. Maybe this color. Or I could choose my own color in there. I could double click on the fill and maybe lighten the yellow up. Use the slider here to find the right yellow along the hue spectrum that I want, and then adjust this circle where I want it to find the value of the yellow I want. And do I want a stroke on the sun? I'm not sure. Maybe not. Maybe no stroke, so I click the stroke off. And I want a gradient on my sun, so I'm grabbing my gradient tool. Now if I switch to gradient, now it's just going to use the last gradient that I put on the sky. So if I go to gradient mode, see, now it's giving me the same gradient that's on the sky. So I don't want to do that. And oh no, I just lost my solid color. Let me see if I go Command Z to undo. Thank goodness for Command Z, right? Edit, undo, or Command Z to undo when you make a mistake. So we got my yellow back, and I can drag my yellow into the gradient slider so I don't lose it, and it'll go onto the sun. But now I've got all sorts of stuff going on here that I need to fix. So the yellow now, the opacity is set at 40%. I want it at 100%. So I'm going to switch that. And I don't want these colors, so I'm going to throw some of these colors out. And I don't want this to be at 0 opacity, so I want to bring it back up to 100. And instead of this color, let me throw this color out. I want something more orange, maybe. Okay, so there's a sun with a linear gradient on it, but you've got these different types of gradients. So there's linear, there's radial, and there's the new freeform gradient we could try. I'm going to go to radial. So if I switch to radial, now I've got a circular gradient. So the colors radiate out from the center in a circular way. And I can redraw the gradient if I want with the gradient tool. I can switch to the gradient tool and redraw it somewhere. I can move the whole, if I hover in the right spot, I can move this whole gradient tool gadget around to make it look like it's a sphere lit from one side. Fiery ball there. And then maybe I want the sun to have lots of rays. Well, the star's a sun, but this star here, when I select the star tool and I drag it out like that, or like this, or like this, I'm making these really cute cliche stars, not quite looking like a sun yet. But if you select any one of the shape tools and you click, just single click, not click drag, just click anywhere in the document, then you'll get numeric values that you can plug in. So I can set the number of points. Maybe I want 20 points for my sun. So I change the number of points. I say okay, and it made me a tiny little sun there. I'm going to hold shift and scale it up. So now I've got this to play with. But but I have this in the wrong order. I want this to be behind the sphere. So what do? I can select my, I can go to Object, and at the top of the Object menu, there's Transform, Arrange, Align. There's Arrange. Arrange, you can do Send Backward or Send to Back. Let's see what happens if I do Send Backward. It looks like nothing happened, but something did happen. It went backwards in the stacking order. If you look at the Layers panel, you'll see where I have, whatever I have selected is going to be lit up. I just flipped open, everything's on layer 1, but there's a stacking order. So if I flip this layer open, you can see that in my stacking order, here's my sun with the sun rays, and here's my sphere down here. When I went to Object, Arrange, Send Backward, the sun rays just went one step back. You can also right click and go to Arrange, Send Backward this way, and it's going step by step. But this is the long way to do it. If you notice, there are these keyboard shortcuts you can start memorizing, and I have a handout that I give you later to if you don't know the symbols, I give you a handout to remind you what the symbols are. But the symbols on a Mac here, does anyone know what this arrow is? Shift. And this is command, and the command key has this symbol printed on it on our keyboards, and this is the right bracket. So Send Backward would be command left bracket. So it's a lot easier than clicking or than going to the menu all the time. You can just use command left bracket. Watch this. So you select the object, command left bracket. Left bracket's right by the key, the P key, and you just go tap, 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 and get it to the right order. Or I could have done send all the way to the back. If I go to Object, this is the way I used to do it when I was kind of new to Illustrator. I used to just send something all the way to the back. See, it went all the way behind the sky. Whoops, I just double clicked on my sky now. This is what happens if you double click on a shape. It isolates it. So the way that you get out of it is you either double click outside the shape or you click the arrow to get out until you don't see anything at the top. But here it is, the sun is now behind. You see the rays sticking up. It's behind the sky. But I know I want the sky to be behind everything, so I can select the sky and send that all the way to the back by going Object, Arrange, Send all the way to the back of the stack. And then I can adjust these. I'm going to go back to Properties. When I select more than one object, by clicking on one, you can select more than one object by clicking on one object, holding shift and clicking on another. As soon as you select more than one object, you get some handy panels in the tools that will come up in Properties, like the Align panel, which you can also find under Window in alphabetical order. But why bring it up when it's nice and neat here? And all I need to do is go to my Align panel, just check my Align to settings, make sure it's set to Align to Selection so the objects align to each other, and then I can center with Horizontal Align Center and Vertical Align Center. Center, center, there we go. Now the two objects are centered to each other. I don't want them to come apart, so I'm going to group them now. So I go to Object, Group, which is super easy to remember this keyboard shortcut, Command G. And if you go home and you work on a PC, anytime we have Command here as a keyboard shortcut, Command is the same as Control on a PC. Group. And then select, and I can move this around like that as a unit. And if I change my mind later and I want to ungroup it, I can go to Object, Ungroup, and now they'll be apart. They can easily be moved apart. I'm going to undo that though and shift click the rays again and hit Command G to group them so they stay together. Okay, so I got my cutesy little sun, my cutesy little stars. Okay, I'll just delete this one. I don't think I want that anymore. And just wanted to show you putting an elliptical radial gradient on this. So let's say I take this shape here and I want to switch it to gradient. So I take my gradient panel. What do? Drag this color into the gradient. Ooh, that's interesting. These colors are so close together that it's making a hard line there. But I'm going to take some of these colors out by clicking on them, dragging them, and dropping them out. So you can swap the order of the colors. I want this color over here. I want to drag in some of these lighter greens in here. Maybe I want to get rid of this white and just have maybe the yellow and maybe another green. I don't know. No, I don't like that green. I'm just going to go with this. Okay, so I've got this radial gradient here. I wanted to show you, well, maybe I'll do a darker green on the outskirts. So I could drag in a darker green here and adjust the color stuff so they blend how I want. And then I switch to the gradient tool. And I'm going to zoom in here. I switched out of here. I'm going to go back to the gradient tool. I've got this perfect circle gradient. If I want the gradient to be elliptical, I just wanted to show you if you wanted to match the shape here, I could drag on the this little black circle down, and now my gradient's elliptical. I can also rotate the gradient if I wanted to, or keep it lined up with the shape. And this circle here that's black and white, I can drag on it to scale the gradient. So you can try that. Change the, and then okay, and this has a black stroke on it. Maybe I want it to have a more like a dark green stroke. Let me just double click on this, on the stroke, and go to the green and choose something like a dark green here for my stroke. One thing you could do on a stroke to make your work look more like hand-drawn is you can use a cool tool that's right here that's called the width tool. Looks like an upside down mustache, but it's actually showing you controlling the width of the stroke. So I'm going to select the width tool and I'm going to hover over the path and with the width tool, and you see a little control point here. You can drag on it outwards to make the stroke thicker. Now see how I have a variable width stroke? Got a wide stroke, the stroke's wide on this side and thin on this side. And I can add more of these control points and drag out to make it thick or in to make it thin. In to make it thin. That has a ring to it. Out to make it thick, in to make it thin. If you have too many of these little control points and things are getting messy, you can always select a point and press delete and go back to a control point and adjust it. When you hover over it, you'll see the control, and you can adjust it to drag it to adjust the thickness. Another reason that I wanted to show you this is because I want to show you a whole slew of tools that are hiding underneath the width tool. So if you click and hold on these tools, if you click and hold on the width tool, you'll see a ton of other tools listed there that are great for reshaping your shapes. This is how the artists of the work that I showed, this is how people were able to create more freeform works from their imagination rather than just sticking to the geometric shapes. You can do more shapes that you might see in the natural world with these other tools. I'm going to click on the tear off so that I have all these tools at my fingertips. But I think I actually want to flip this the other way. So instead of going back with my width tool and changing the width, another way that you can work is to flip something is you can right click and go to transform and reflect. You can get to that up here in object too, object, transform, reflect, but I like the right click. It just makes it more convenient. Right click, transform, reflect, and I'm just reflecting along the vertical, and I'm going to just say okay. Okay, so now I've got this reflected. Maybe I want to change this stroke color a little bit more lighter, a little lighter. And now I want to, or maybe a gradient would be interesting in the stroke, so I could swap it to gradient. That's kind of nice. There's a gradient in this stroke. Let me see if I switch it to linear gradient. You see more of the gradient in there. Now you see the gradient in the stroke. Okay, so now that I've got all these tools that were hiding under the width tool, I've got them all out at my fingertips. I'm going to show you some of my favorites here. The warp tool, first of all. I'm going to click on the warp tool to select it, and then I can, on a selected shape, I can click and drag to alter the shape. So I'm just clicking and dragging along the edges of this shape and warping it to become a new shape. Maybe look more like a natural hill. And if you have everything deselected, like let's say you took the selection tool, you clicked outside an empty space and there's nothing selected, and then you go to the warp tool and you click and drag along things, you're going to warp everything that's under the warp tool. But if you want to isolate the warp tool to just work on specific shapes, then select your specific shape first. I'm going to undo, Command Z, and maybe I'll go to this shape too. Maybe thicken the stroke on this. And then I think I like that gradient stroke, so I'll give it the gradient. And then maybe I'll take out the yellow on it though. And then I will adjust the width with my width tool. Make the stroke maybe get thinner in places, thicker in other places. And then I might go to my warp tool. You don't need to have a stroke on things. You don't need to use the width tool, but in order to use the rest of these tools. So the warp tool, I can click and drag to change the shape. If I want to change the shape of my tool itself, I can hold down on Option. As soon as you hold down on Option while you're on the warp tool, hold down on Option, you'll see this little L appear next to your cursor or next to your tool target, and then you click and drag up to make the tool bigger. You click and drag down to make the tool tip smaller. If you want more elliptical, you can drag upwards. If you want a wider elliptical, you can drag to the right. And then with a bigger tool, you can create bigger, smoother, rounder hills like that. I want to show you how to combine shapes now to make something something new from combining shapes. Maybe I've got too many of these cute stars here. Maybe I want to do something different. Okay, so let's say I want to make some clouds. I'm going to go back to, I'm going to deselect everything and go back to the default. There's a default button here that lets you go back to just a white fill and a black stroke. And then I'm going to take my ellipse tool and just drag out some circles. Well, not circles, but ellipses, and put them together as clouds. But it's actually a lot easier to not have the stroke showing to figure out how to create a cloud with multiple ellipses. So I want to select all of these shapes together. If you want a quick way to select a lot of shapes together without having to hold shift and click, 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 because that can take forever, is to use your selection tool to drag out a marquee that touches everything. But the problem is I'm selecting my sky too, and I only want to select these ellipses. So what you can do, if you want certain shapes to not be selected or not be accidentally moved to be, if you don't want to interfere with certain shapes, like this sky here, I don't want to move it out of place, I don't want it selected, I could select it and go to Object and hover over Lock and choose Lock Selection. Command 2 is a good one to remember too, because I lock things down a lot. So Command 2 is your friend. When you want to unlock, you just go to Object and choose Unlock All, and it'll unlock everything that's on that layer. So see how in the layers it's showing there's a little lock there. This is another way to lock things, is just click the locks on and off here. When you go to Object, Unlock All, it will take off all the locks from whatever sublayers you have on that layer. But I want my sky locked, so I can click it. I could also just click the lock there to lock it. And now I can select all the ellipses by dragging a marquee around all of them. And let's say I don't want the stroke to show now. So I'm going to click None there. And just try to assemble my ellipses so that they look like a cloud shape. You can scale them down a little bit. Let's see. Maybe circles make a better cloud shape than ellipses. Maybe something more circular. Or not. So, if you guys want to follow along, you want to try this, because I'm going to show you a really cool tool to combine shapes. Maybe I'll do another circle or ellipse here and make something that will resemble a cloud. You can also, at any time, you can go on Google and look up cloud or whatever you wanna draw. Cloud images. Click on images, but we want cloud art maybe, just to see cloud drawings. Cloud drawing easy. See what kind of shape you're going for, to just get ideas. Maybe round like that. And don't copy one or the other. Just get an overall look and take ideas from your favorites, and then go back to Illustrator and combine them together over here. Say, okay, I want one. I'm on the right track. I'm gonna go with this. Something like that. Okay, so I got my ellipses, and I could just group everything together and have a cloud, just like this. Select everything and group it, and have a cloud with a bunch of ellipses. But maybe I want to simplify it. Maybe I do want a stroke outline on it, and I wouldn't be fooling anybody if I had a group of circles or ellipses like this with the strokes around them. So I want to combine these into one single shape. So there's a tool for that. It's right under where the width tool and the warp tool are. Right under that width tool is a tool called Shape Builder. It looks like a sideways snowman, but what it is it's showing your cursor drawing through two circles and making them into one shape. So the steps for this are: first, take your selection tool, select all the shapes that you want to combine, then go to your Shape Builder tool, and then hover over a shape area. As soon as you hover over a shape area with your Shape Builder, you'll see kind of this textural grid up here, and just click and drag across the overlapping areas. You can click and drag and release as many times as you want. You can keep just clicking and dragging, and it's combining the different overlapping areas into one shape. And now I have, this is all, instead of this being a bunch of ellipses, it's now one shape, which is, I like. It's cleaner, it's simpler. If you have like little pieces though, let me see, I've got some little pieces here. You might be able to just select those and delete them. Let's see. No. Oops. What I shouldn't have missed those pieces. So I'm gonna undo and go back a few steps. I'm gonna take my selection tool and select over all of these pieces, and I'm going to go back to my Shape Builder and click and drag right over the little pieces that I missed. You don't want to leave any little pieces, little holes. So I'm going to go back out, and I got this. So now you could, I can duplicate it. My favorite way to duplicate in Illustrator is select the object, hold Option, and Option drag out a duplicate. So you drag out the duplicate, you release the mouse, and then you release the Option key. You can keep doing that. Option drag, duplicate. If you release the Option key too soon, what happens is you end up just moving. I just released the Option key, and now I'm going to release the mouse. You end up just moving the object. But if you want to duplicate, you use your selection tool to hover over the selected object. You hold Option, you'll see the duplicate icon appear, and you Option drag, release the mouse, then release the Option key. And I'm going to scale these. Decide if I want the sun to be in front. I can select the sun, right click, arrange, bring to front. Now the sun's in the front of these clouds here. Duplicate. Maybe I put the hill in the front of this cloud, or send. I'll just do Command. I'll select the cloud and I'll try to send it behind the hill with Command left bracket a bunch of times. Oh, it went too far. Command right bracket. Come back up. Be over that hill. And I need a foreground, so maybe I'll grab my rectangle tool again and draw out something that could resemble water. So I click and drag, but that doesn't look like water until I'll take off the stroke, and I can copy the same gradient that's on the sky by taking my eyedropper and clicking on the sky. Adobe Illustrator would like to record this computer screen. Not sure why they do that. I'm gonna stop recording.